Welcome to your overview video for Chapter 26, Music Between the Two World Wars. Your learning objectives for this chapter are, number 1, to briefly describe the differences in the political situations in France, Germany, the Soviet Union, and the Americas during the interwar period, and explain the impact of politics on the patronage of music in the classical tradition. And number 2, to name some of the most prominent classical composers active in France, Germany, the Soviet Union, and the Americas between the two world wars, characterize their musical styles, and name some of their most important works. Music has long been linked to politics, as we have seen in earlier chapters. In the 19th century, some writers claimed that classical music was an autonomous art that should be admired for its own sake, but it never fully escaped politics. The period between the wars brought new links between music and politics. Believing that music must be relevant to social needs, some composers tried to make their music more accessible to audiences and amateurs, while nationalism continued in many countries. Most governments sponsored musical activities directly. The connections between musical style and politics varied with the political situation in each nation. Between the two world wars, music in the classical tradition continued to diversify and became increasingly tied to political concerns and ideologies. In France, musical life had long been connected with politics. During and after World War I, neoclassicism became the prevailing trend in France, allied with patriotism. Conservatives identified classicism with balance, order, discipline, and tradition, while composers on the left saw the classic as universal and not national. Les Six, meaning the Six, was a group of French composers who sought to escape the old political dichotomies and wrote highly individual works that drew on a wide range of influences, including neoclassicism. Arthur Honegger, 1892 to 1955, is best known for Pacific 231 from 1923, an orchestral impression of a train, and for his oratorio, King David, that premiered in 1923. Darius Milhaud, 1892 to 1974, prolific in every genre, blended neoclassicism with other influences from jazz to Schoenberg. He was especially open to sounds and styles from the Americas. Saxophone, ragtime syncopations, and elements of the blues find their way into his ballet La Création du Monde, The Creation of the World, from 1923. Francis Poulenc, 1899 to 1963, drew especially on the Parisian popular chanson tradition associated with cabarets and revues. Music and politics were linked closely in Germany under the Weimar Republic, 1913 to 1933, and the Nazis, 1933 to 1944, attacked modern music and banned leftists and Jews from public life. The new objectivity, Neue Sachlichkeit, of the 1920s opposed complexity and favored music that was widely accessible, objective in expression, and connected to current concerns. Ernest Krenek, 1900 to 1991, embodied the ideals of new objectivity in Johnny Spielt Auf, Johnny Strikes Up the Band, from 1927, which was attacked by the Nazis for its use of jazz. Kurt Weill, 1900 to 1950, a supporter of new objectivity, sought to entertain everyday people rather than intellectual elites. Weill and playwright Bertolt Brecht collaborated on Rise and Fall of the City of Mahogany in 1930, an allegorical opera about the failures of capitalism. Weill and Brecht's The Threepenny Opera from 1928, adapted from The Beggar's Opera, parodied American hit songs and was a great success before being banned as decadent by the Nazis in 1933. After immigrating to the United States, Weill wrote successful Broadway musicals in the spirit of new objectivity. Paul Hindemith, 1895 to 1963, among the most prolific composers of the century, was also important as a teacher and performer. During the Weimar period, he moved from expressionism to writing neotonal music that avoided romantic expressivity and focused on purely musical procedures. By the late 1920s, Hindemith began composing Gebrauchsmusik, music for use, music for young or amateur performers that was modern, challenging, and yet rewarding to perform. Hindemith's opera, Matthias der Maler, Matthias the Painter, 1934 to 1935, written after the Nazis came to power, examines the role of the artist in relation to politics. From the 1930s on, Hindemith wrote in a neo-romantic style and developed a new harmonic method that he called harmonic fluctuation, in which phrases start with relative consonants, move toward greater dissonance, and return to consonance. Hindemith immigrated to Switzerland in 1938, then to the United States in 1940, before returning to Europe in 1953. His notable later works include Ludus Tonalis, tonal play from 1942, and Symphonic Metamorphosis from 1943, and Symphony in B-flat for band in 1951. The Nazis established a Reich music chamber to which all musicians had to belong. The Nazis attacked most modern music, but there was no coherent Nazi style of new music. The government focused more on performance than on composition, exploiting the great 19th century German composers as symbols of alleged German superiority. Winning an international reputation during the Nazi era was Karl Orff, 1895 to 1982. He is best known for Carmina Burana from 1936 and for his contributions to music education. In the Soviet Union, the government controlled every realm of life, including the arts. During the early 1920s, the Association of Contemporary Music promoted modernism and contacts with the West, and the Russian Association of Proletarian Musicians supported simple tonal music with wide appeal. Beginning in 1934, Soviet authorities promulgated socialist realism, which called for accessible melodic folk-like music on patriotic or inspirational topics, and condemned formalism. Sergei Prokofiev, 1891 to 1953, made his initial reputation as a radical modernist. After touring outside Russia, he accepted commissions from the Soviet regime for works in a more popular style, including Alexander Nevsky, and he returned permanently in 1936. During World War II, he turned to absolute genres, and his music was labeled as formalist by authorities in 1948. Dmitri Shostakovich, 1906 to 1975, spent his career with the Soviet system, reaching international fame at a young age. He achieved great success with Lady Macbeth of the Minsk district in 1934, but he and his opera were attacked in the official press 2 years later. Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony, modeled on Mahler and Tchaikovsky, outwardly conformed to socialist realism, but could be heard as conveying emotions experienced in a totalitarian regime. The Seventh Symphony, 1941, is a programmatic work on the heroic defense of Leningrad that some hear as a complaint against Stalin's repression. In 1948, Shostakovich was denounced, and he responded with music for the regime and some for himself. The apparent double meanings in his music reflect the fact that he could never say precisely what he felt under Soviet rule. Composers of the Americas often found that creating a distinctive national style helped them gain attention from an international audience. Canada had a thriving musical life that developed along patterns similar to those in the United States. Claude Champagne, 1891 to 1965, was the first Canadian composer to achieve an international reputation. In Brazil, art music was well established by the late 19th century. Heitor Villa-Lobos, 1887 to 1959, the most important Brazilian composer, drew together traditional Brazilian elements with modernist techniques. In Bachianas Brasileiras, 1930 to 1945, he paid tribute to Bach with a blend of Baroque and Brazilian folk elements. Beginning in 1921, the Mexican government supported bringing the arts to a wide public and promoted nationalism, drawing on native Indian cultures. Carlos Chavez, 1899 to 1978, the first composer associated with the new nationalism, wrote ballets and symphonic works with Aztec elements. Sylvester Revueltas, 1899 to 1940, combined melodies modeled on Mexican folk and popular music with a modernist idiom. American composers and performers developed new links with Europe, as many studied with Nadia Boulanger in France, and several European composers immigrated to the United States. The interwar period saw some new currents among American composers, including ultra-modernist and Americanist trends. Born and trained in France, Edgard Varese, 1883 to 1965, moved to New York in 1915 and composed music influenced by Debussy, Schoenberg, and Stravinsky. Beginning in the 1920s, Varese imagined music as spatial, in which sound masses characterized by timbre, register, rhythm, and pitch change and interact in unconventional ways, and percussion is on an equal footing with other instruments. Hyperism illustrates how pitch, instrumental color, gesture, and rhythm interact to suggest sound masses colliding and changing. In this music, the listener must put aside expectations and must simply observe the interaction of bodies of sound. After World War II, Varese used electronic means to create new sounds. Henry Cowell, 1897 to 1965, in his experimental pieces, tried out new techniques such as tone clusters and playing directly on the strings of the piano, new textures, and new procedures. During and after the 1930s, Cowell created a more accessible musical language, often incorporating American, Irish, or Asian elements. Cowell promoted and published music by modernist and ultramodernist composers. Ruth Crawford Seeger, 1901 to 1953, experimented with dissonant counterpoint, rhythmic independence of parts, and serial techniques, and she then turned from composition to editing and arranging American folk songs. A number of American composers embraced jazz and an Americanist sound. George Gershwin was the most famous and frequently performed American composer in classical genres in the late 1920s and 1930s. His best-known piece, Rhapsody in Blue from 1924, incorporates jazz, blues, and popular music into art music, creating a work that was at once truly modern, truly American, and broadly appealing. Gershwin continued to blend traditions in his other works, and he remains the most familiar American composer of the century. Aaron Copland, 1900 to 1990, became the most important American composer of his generation through his own compositions and his work for the cause of American music. Jazz elements and strong dissonances figure prominently in Copland's early works. In the 1930s and 1940s, Copland sought to appeal to a larger audience by reducing his modernist technique to its essence and combining it with simple textures and diatonic melodies and harmonies. His American idiom is exemplified in the ballet Appalachian Spring from 1943 to 1944. The use of widely spaced sonorities, open octaves and fifths, and diatonic dissonance became a musical emblem for America. Although Copland employed a variety of styles in his later works, including some 12-tone methods, he retained his unique artistic identity. William Grant Still, 1895 to 1978, incorporated specifically American idioms into art music and broke numerous racial barriers. His Afro-American Symphony from 1930 encompasses African-American musical elements within the traditional framework of a European four-movement symphony. For your 26-question quiz, I would know about the following. Know about politics' influence on music. Know about Jean Cocteau. Know about the members of Les Six and their beliefs. Know about Darius Milhaud. Know about Honegger and his work King David. Know about Francis Poulenc. Know about Ernest Krenek. Know about Kurt Weill. Know about Paul Hindemith. Know what Gebroch's music is. Know about Mathis der Maler by Hindemith. Know about Karl Orff. Know about the Russian Association of Proletarian Musicians. Know about socialist realism. Know about Prokofiev. Know about Prokofiev's cantata Alexander Nevsky. Know about Shostakovich's Lady Macbeth of the Minsk District. Know about Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. Know about Claude Champagne. Know about Hater Villalobos. Know about Mexican composer Revoltas. Know about Edgar Varese. Know about Henry Cowell. Know about Crawford Seeger. Know about Gershwin. And know about Copland. And that should do it. Good luck.